Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Radio Warrior, every Saturday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Welcome to Blog Talk Radio. This is a Radio Warrior show. My name is Joshua Lamens. We have some amazing guests on today to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're in Canada, British Columbia, but we have some guests from the United States. We have with us, let me pull up my file here, we have Margaret Flowers, who is a medical doctor, a congressional fellow with the Physicians for National Health Program, and a pediatrician based in Baltimore. She's been very active. If you look up her name, you'll find her from RT News to almost every important media outlet that isn't mainstream necessarily. We also have Kevin Zies. He's an American political activist who's been a leader in the drug policy reform and peace movement. We also have a First Nations woman from British Columbia. Her name is, let me see here, Barbara Sayers from the Hupachasset, if I pronounce it correctly, First Nation, who's been fairly active with the China FIPA. She was instrumental in being able to stop and table that. We also have Barbara Berger from the Council of Canadians, and have I missed anybody? I don't think so. And so we welcome you all. I'd like to first give, if Brenda Sayers could say a word about what she's found out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and how it relates to, similarly, the China FIPA situation and the NAFTA agreement. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Joshua. It's good to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll talk about the Canada-China FIPA and our court challenge to it, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. I know that they're linked to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but I'm not too familiar with that field. So we, as a First Nation, challenged the Canada-China FIPA. We're currently at Court of Appeal waiting to hear a hearing date for the court to hear the arguments by Canada and Hupachasset. And so that's where we're at. We originally heard about the CC FIPA. Of course, most people know that it was quietly tabled in the House, where it was going to be ratified by Cabinet. And it was Elizabeth May that brought it to the attention of Canadians, and that's how Hupachasset first heard about it. When we looked at it as Chief and Counsel, we realized the impact that it would have on First Nations rights and title. We looked at our own territory. We're rich in forestry, in salmon, and we have a coal mine bed that runs through our territory. And we would like to look down the road and know that we've protected resources in our territory for future generations.
How will the TPP affect British Columbia and the First Nations communities?
The TPP I'm not really too familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me anything about Canada, China, and I'll probably answer you.
Well, I think the situation is that they are putting it through the same way that they were trying to put in the China FIPA thing, where they have secret negotiations and.
Well, this is true, and this is something that our team has looked at when we have talked about the TPP, because we have quite a large team that helps Hupachasset First Nation along the way. And that was one of the questions that I had about the TPP, and did some research on it, whether or not it could be challenged in court for the same reasons as the Canada-China. And there is no document that you could take to court to challenge it. So they haven't brought the information, the document to the attention of the public.
Okay, so I know that WikiLeaks uncovered some of the information. What bothers me is that it seems that they haven't disclosed everything, almost like the TPP, which makes me wonder what's actually going on. I know that the medical situation concerning generic medicines and the agreement that's coming out. Maybe Dr. Flowers, you can speak to what's happening on the medical end of the TPP agreement that you know of.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me. And we do have some parts of the text of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, that have been leaked, so we have some sense of what's going on. Your listeners should know that the TPP is an agreement that for the first time in the history of the negotiation of these types of trade agreements, the text has actually been classified, so the public doesn't have access to it. Our members of Congress in the United States have limited access, but 600 corporate advisors are helping to write and shape that text in their interest. So what we've seen from a health standpoint is a number of concerning issues. Overall, it looks like the United States is trying to export our failed model of privatized healthcare to the rest of the world by giving greater legal standing and greater rights to private corporations. So, for instance, when it comes to medications, the pharmaceutical corporations can now have something we consider to be an evergreen patent. They get 20 years patent for medication, but then if they change an indication or they change the way the medication is delivered, they can restart that patent for another 20 years. In addition to that, when finally patents do run out, if a company wants to make a generic medication, they won't be allowed to use any of the research that the company used that patented the medication to get their license to have that medication. They have to redo all the research, which is a significant financial barrier for generic medicines. We also know that health corporations will have greater legal standing to sue countries if those countries' health systems try to negotiate for a price for services, for medical devices, for medications. Now these corporations can sue for a higher price, which will undermine these national health systems and their ability to afford to provide care for all of their people. In addition to that, the TPP is really going after what are called state-owned enterprises. So that would be like a national health system. They're not allowed to, under the TPP, have any unfair advantages, so that, special tax status or special access to capital or anything like that is not considered fair for a national health system. Of course, the TPP writers, authors are totally fine with it if any kinds of laws help their profits. They're just trying to point out all the laws that hurt them. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the concerns with the TPP and medicine.
So basically that medicines that you find on the counter are generic medicines, as with has been stated by Doctors Without Borders, will almost be annihilated, and the prices of medicines will go sky high, and we will have no control over it.
Right, and for people in countries that have lower incomes, this is going to be a significant barrier to them and to their ability to take care of the health needs of their population. It also drives us in the direction where, the corporations that are creating these medications and devices will only be catering to the kind of conditions and populations where they can make a lot of money, and not really caring about the conditions in countries where a small change can have a tremendous impact on the health of that population.
This is Kevin Zies. Could I make a point about this?
Yes, of course.
I think this really puts the Canadian healthcare system at risk. Yeah. If the TPP becomes law, you're not going to be able to control some of the critical prices in your healthcare system. It's not only medicine, pharmaceutical drugs that are going to go through the roof, but the TPP allows surgical procedures to be patented. So those prices, if you want a surgical procedure, you got to go to the patent holder and pay for it. So these prices are going to go way up, and you're going to lose control of the cost of your healthcare system. On top of that, down the road, I really expect you'll see insurance companies demanding access to the Canadian health market, and saying that by blocking insurance companies from coming into Canada, that's an unfair restraint on trade. And so you may be forced by the TPP to have an insurance-based, market-based system like the United States. Our system's lousy. It doesn't work. We literally let tens of thousands, over 80,000 Americans die each year because our system is so poor that preventable illnesses are not prevented. And that 80,000 figure is basically comparing the United States to the top 3 systems in the world, Japan, France, and Australia. And these kinds of trade agreements put those systems at risk. So it's not a question of providing a good service or a public service to people like healthcare should be. It's about commodifying everything, making everything into a product that can be sold. And so I think that the Canadians need to wake up and seriously protest the TPP because it puts your healthcare system at risk. And, as far as other issues that I see Indigenous people in the United States and Canada working on, like on energy issues and fracking and tar sands, again, you're going to see these kind of things all made worse. This is an issue, the TPP, that affects every aspect of our lives, from the quality of our food. I mean, how can a country keep GMOs out? That's a restraint on trade.
Yeah, well,
the quality of our food, to the water, all these issues are affected. So I think it's important to really people wake up and say no to this agreement.
Now, it seems to me that with the TPP and what's happening with you in the United States with ACA, the Obamacare situation, that nobody in any way can stop this. So, and with the TPP, as human beings, it seems that we'll be losing our sovereignty. How, in the States, as an activist, are you being able to have any inroads in your work against the TPP, against Obamacare, against these critical situations?
We are having an impact. They predicted the TPP. They need to have what we call in the United States fast track, which is a process where the Congress basically lets the president sign the agreement, and then Congress gives a quick look to it over a few months, these multi-thousand-page documents, and votes up or down on it. So that's what they wanted to have. They wanted that 3 years ago. They wanted it 2 years ago. They wanted it last year. They wanted it this year. They've been unable to get it through because people have said no. And so we've been stopping fast track and stopping that destruction of democracy. And we have another battle coming up. That it's not over. It's an ongoing process. But I do think we can actually stop the TPP, and I think Canada can too. And I think beyond that, we go beyond that. What we advocate for is local cities, towns, counties, reservations, people in those communities voting to say, we will not submit to the TPP. We're not going to allow a secretly negotiated agreement that's rushed through in an undemocratic way without our legislatures being involved in the decision-making process, without the people being involved to rule our lives. And there are jurisdictions in the United States at the local level who are passing resolutions saying this is a TPP-free zone. And they're saying, their elected officials are saying, at the city and county level, we will not obey the TPP if it becomes law. This is really important because this is a real resistance act. Vancouver is more progressive than other parts of Canada. Montreal has its own perspectives. All these cities across the country and smaller towns can begin saying, we will not obey. We will not obey a law that's written in secret, that we can't see, that our legislators can't see, that our legislators can't even vote on, and say, no, we're not going to submit to that. We believe in democracy. This is a real opportunity, I think, to build a democracy movement in all these jurisdictions around the world, Canada, the United States, and the Pacific Rim countries, because this is a real affront to democracy.
Yes, it is.
If I could just add on to that, one of the main ways that the TPP affects our sovereignty is that once this agreement has been signed, our laws, even down to the local level, will have to be brought into compliance with the agreement. So that completely subverts the democratic process and our ability to have a say over those laws. But one way that we've really been able to overcome this in the U.S. is that we understand that this is an agreement that affects everything we care about. And so we've reached out to all sorts of activists across a broad spectrum, the anti-GMO, food sovereignty activists, healthcare activists, the environmentalists, people concerned about climate change, workers' rights, internet freedom. We've all come together, even across the ideological spectrum, to fight against the fast-track legislation, which is essential for our president to get this agreement signed. And so we've made the issue of this TPP and fast-track a very politically toxic issue so that members of Congress in our country are unwilling to touch it, especially in an election year.
Outside of the alternative media that is talking a lot about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other things, are you seeing a change, a shift within Congress and the Senate and different groups that are actually starting to voice complaints? Do you see any mainstream media actually speaking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership that is swinging some of the information your way?
That's one of the most interesting things about this battle. There's been an intentional corporate media blackout. They have refused to cover the TPP. There's been research done on how few stories the various networks have run on it, almost none. And despite that, because we now have our own independent media, our own citizens media, our own social media, we got the word out to people about the TPP. So it's not, it's less important what the media does. It's more important what we do. I think we need to educate our neighbors and our friends through our social media, our citizens and independent media. And that can, if we start to do that, by the way, it's exercising a muscle that may be one of the most important we have. If we can get our various independent media and social media outlets coordinated, we can have a bigger influence on what people know and what people understand than the corporate media does. In the United States, for example, the corporate media now, only about 25% of Americans believe it tells us the truth. It has very low credibility. But on the other hand, the social media and the citizens media has the opposite because you're talking to friends and neighbors and family. And so it's a really interesting time. And so we've created this movement of movements that Mark had described that connects all these different sub-movements together without any mass media coverage, without any corporate media coverage. And we've done that and successfully done it enough so we could create enough pressure in Congress, both the House and Senate, so that they've refused to move forward with Obama's fast track. We've had more than 100 members of Congress writing to the trade rep and Obama saying no to fast track. We've had Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, the leaders of the Democratic Party in the House, saying fast track's not happening this year. Harry Reid in the Senate has done the same thing. Now, there'll be more battles ahead. I'm not saying we've stopped it, but we've really moved Congress a great deal, and we've done it without the corporate media. We've done it with our own media, and that's a very empowering thing. And I think the same would be true in Canada, that you can, through your own media networks, like these kinds of shows that we're on right here, people are hearing the TPP some for the first time because I'm sure your media is not covering it either. This is intentional. The reason they keep this treaty secret, the reason they keep it off the media, is because they know that if people know about it, it loses. And that's their Achilles heel, and that's our strength. We can let people know about it, and we win.
Is there a way in this illegal process to say no? Is there? It's like as a citizen, as a human being, like with GMOs, Monsanto, a lot of the medical things going on. How can an individual or a group just say this is an illegal process? You have to stop, because what's happening is we as citizens in a lot of ways feel quite powerless. We in Canada contacting Ed Fast, who's the Minister of International Trade, or when things come up, they absolutely ignore most of what comes to them.
That's why I mentioned the local trade justice movement.
Yeah.
Work at your local level to get your local town council, city council, county council, provincial council to pass, a resolution saying we will not obey a law written in secret, passed without appropriate democratic process that undermines our ability to protect our community, to protect our environment, protect our citizens. We will not obey. If you say we can't buy local, we're going to buy local. If you say we can't buy green, we're going to buy green. If you say we have to have GMOs, we're not going to buy GMOs. We are going to set the standards for our community in a democratic way. We're not going to let you take this non-democratic approach and undermine. That is the kind, and what's beautiful about that is when you do that at the local level, that means you're reaching out to people who care about food and water and health and internet and all these issues that are affected by the TPP, and you're creating a local grassroots base. And that grassroots base, as it passes local legislation, will get stronger. And as it gets stronger, and when that happens, by the way, there's media discussion about, a resolution passed to say we're not going to obey a TPP? What's that about? And so it gets in the media, and people start to wonder about why is this even being discussed? How can we, how bizarre not to obey a law that's being passed? I mean, it's a real revolutionary idea, and it can happen. And it doesn't require every, town across the country to happen. You start to get that happening in a handful of towns, it's going to make news that they can't ignore. And that's going to start to create a groundswell of opposition, and I believe you will be able to stop the TPP in Canada as well.
So start
I think
local.
if I could add on.
Yeah.
Add on to that, a similar approach was used to stop the multilateral agreement on investment, where towns started passing resolutions against that. But what's really important to remember, because we have the same political situation here in the United States, where our government doesn't respond to the needs or interests of the people. But it's amazing how shining a light on what's going on, it doesn't take that many people working together to expose what's going on, and that really causes our politicians to back down a little bit.
If your listeners just look up, our website for the campaign on TPP is called flushthetpp.org. Flushthetpp.org, and all this information is there. If you want to get model resolutions for towns that pass their own, we will not obey the TPP. This is a TPP free zone resolution. You can go to Alliance for Democracy, or just look up TPP free zone, and you'll find examples. Because this is now being something that's discussed in cities in various parts of the country, the United States. So it's an opportunity, the models there that you can follow, and we can develop an international movement that says the grassroots and our governments are saying, no, we will not allow undemocratic treaties to be passed and forcing us to do things against our wishes.
Exactly. I know if our listeners go to radiowarrior.ca, we've highlighted Flush the TP and a few other sites that they can go to get some education, one of them being for Canada, the Council of Canadians. Barbara Berger from the Council of Canadians, what kind of information do you have for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and some of the other things that involve this situation here in Canada?
Hi, yes, thanks for having me on. I don't specifically have much information about the TPP per se, other than what your guests have already said, and other things like GMO labeling, which of course we don't even have in Canada, and the drug patents and that kind of thing. But not only are we fighting against the TPP, but we have the Canada-China FIPA agreement, and we also have the European CETA agreement. So 3 very large trade agreements still waiting to be ratified, thank goodness, and have not been. One of the things about the FIPA agreement, when it hit the information or the radio waves, we had it on a radio talk show, a mainline radio talk show, Cross Country Checkup it was called, devoted to that particular topic, and it was amazing how many people phoned in, even people in the oil and gas industry who made their livings, phoning in and saying, we do not want this kind of an agreement to happen. Just for the same example, like the investor-state dispute mechanism is the major problem with all of these agreements, because it gives the investor the rights, essentially, no matter what it is that's being, what the business is, whether it's gas and oil, whether it's drug patents, whether it's your guest said it doesn't matter. It covers all areas, whether it's workforce or being able to buy locally or that kind of thing. It's the investor that comes into the country that has the rights over and above the citizens of that country. And our governments are complicit in that. And one of the things I said, well, why is it that our government is allowed to sign these treaties and not even bring it to our parliament? And I heard that it's an old archaic position that the government of the day has the right to sign any treaty. But that was back in the 1800s when they were making treaties. And they still have that kind of thing today, where they have the right to sign any kind of treaty. So trade deal, treaty, call it what you will, that's how these things get through. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier too about why the MAI and the World Trade and the Free Trade Area of the Americas were defeated was because they became well known and they were not done in secret, and now they've learned that lesson. The investors and the government have learned that, once people know, there's going to be an outcry. That's why there was an outcry about FIPA, and it was on the radio, and now we don't hear any more about it. And so it is a matter of pursuing and keeping it alive. It's a very difficult position to be in, keeping these things alive and in the forefront of people's minds. But it all comes down to an investor rights over the citizens, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And FIPA is somewhat similar in the TPP, where it was a privately negotiated situation. Now, the arrangement between China and Canada maybe, Brenda, you can explain the relevance and the similarity between what's happening with the TPP and the experience you've had with the China-FIPA agreement.
Well, just that it was negotiated in secret, just as Barbara just explained.
Yeah.
It could have been ratified by Cabinet. It hasn't yet because it's being held up in court, is what we believe. And, just the investor-state arbitration mechanism. In Canada here with the FIPA, there were two parties that could have stopped the FIPA from being ratified. One was the premiers of each province who didn't step forward on behalf of their citizens. Actually, Christy Clark in BC supported the FIPA.
Mm-hmm.
And the sovereign First Nations, both who have say over the natural resources. And that's how we were able to step in and challenge the FIPA because of our right to the resources and to the land.
Also, and Canadians should know, and First Nations people, that in British Columbia most of the territories are unceded, which have no real agreement with the government which gives you actually a lot of power.
Well, especially in BC, there's only, I think, 3 nations that have treaties, modern-day treaties.
Yep.
And Hupachesset we do not have a treaty.
No.
And the other thing that First Nations need to be aware of, and the message that we've been trying to get out, is that what will happen is if China decides that they want to place a claim against Canada for interfering with their ability to make profit, and it's a First Nation that says no, like in the case of Enbridge, and we know that that's a very large project in BC and in Canada, then China could sue Canada for the loss of anticipated profits, and that will go to a secret 3-person tribunal, which is made up of one person from Canada, one person from China, and a third person of their choice. And unlike NAFTA, contained in the FIPA agreement is a clause that says that they don't necessarily have to make those documents public, nor do they have to make public the amount of the award to China. And that's quite contrary to NAFTA, where all the documents are public. So what will happen is if that takes place, and it's regarding First Nations right and title, and we're saying no to a project, then Canada will have to weigh our rights and title against against whether or not they're going to allow the China state-owned company to proceed with the resource development project. And that to me sets off all kinds of alarms because that is one way that our rights could be undermined. And if Canada goes to China and says, well, this is First Nations land and it's in dispute, it's no defense for Canada against China. So it really, what's the word now, jeopardizes our rights and title. And it seems as though there's a lot of people that aren't understanding how it's going to affect First Nations rights and title.
I know that in British Columbia especially, I spoke to a politician, he'll be unnamed because he didn't want his name to be mentioned. He said the First Nations people don't realize how much power they have. For instance, if they do a blockade, even though they're pushed by the RCMP, like what happened in the territories in New Brunswick, they have a lot of power. He told me, this politician, that the Native people are the last stand. And in a lot of ways we need to stand up in our territories and say, these are unceded territories. You do not have the right to bring in a pipeline. You do not have the right to incur Trans-Pacific Partnership. And what our guest was saying, by acting locally or within the different nations to act locally, which will affect, the entire country. So I think those things are great. Can
I just say one more thing about that?
Yes.
Is that, if the FIPA is ratified, it could be that, of course, the amount of the award to China will affect Canadians in different ways. For example, taxes may go up. Transfers from federal government to provinces may be cut back. And also importantly is the transfers from federal government to First Nations may be jeopardized, and especially if, we say no. So what we're saying as Hupachasat is, let's be proactive. Let's look at all the details up front. Let's challenge it in court and make sure that our rights are incorporated into the FIPA.
I know that it's in Canada right now. There's many courts that are, believe it or not, being transferred to corporate judges. They're in the court. You'll no longer see the Canadian flag or the British Columbia flag, and they're being taken over by corporate entities. I had spoken to a group of elders who were doing an action against the government. The lawyer was there with them. They asked me to come and speak to them, and they said nothing that they were doing concerning residential schooling and a few things that they were there for were being listened to. And I asked them, is there a flag in the court? They said no. And the lawyer was with them. And I said, what you're dealing with is a corporate court. And the mouth dropped open of the lawyer, and basically it clicked, and he realized nothing that they will do will work. So each elder, even when the judge left and said you can't do this, spoke their grievances personally, and the stenographer had to remain and create the record of their words. So we have many things happening in Canada. I'm just going to ask Margaret and Kevin, because they need to go fairly soon, if there's any comments or recommendations you can make to Canadians outside of what you've already said that might help us with the Trans-Pacific Partnership here in Canada.
I guess I would just say that I think that we need to, in this kind of political climate that we're in here, both in the U.S. and Canada, and it's happening all over the world, is that we have to recognize that if we want to change things, each of us has to see ourselves as having a responsibility and a role in doing this. And so I urge all of your listeners to learn more about these issues, both what's happening in Canada and looking at what we're doing here in the United States to stop it, and start talking to people in your community or organizing to fight this, and to start fighting for the other things that you need in your communities. And let's start talking about, as opposed to stopping these terrible agreements, we need to start defining what it is that we want to see going forward. And so we see a lot of opportunities here to end this kind of era of rigged corporate trade and start defining as a global people what kind of relationships that we want to have with each other, and then start to see how we can put those in place. So let's stop these and take action and start to think really big. Thank you for having us on.
Let me add to Margaret's point. I think the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as you've heard from all the speakers here, is really just one example of many of how we're seeing this corporatism, this neoliberal economics forced on us in both our nations and around the world. And we shouldn't, from that happening, feel powerless. In fact, I think just like that politician was telling you about the First Nations being the last line of defense, I would say we are all the last line of defense. Let's not just put it on the First Nations. We all have power. We all have agency in this. And we have a website called Popular Resistance. It's popularresistance.org. It covers resistance movements in the United States, Canada, and around the world. And we do a lot of coverage of First Nations actions in Canada over pipelines and excavation and such. And on the website, we have a strategy page, and we talk about what it takes to win. Because we're at an interesting time in history where we've had, Gandhi doing his first resistance actions in South Africa was at the beginning of the 20th century. And since then, there have been hundreds and hundreds of resistance movements. And so as a result of that, we know what works and what doesn't work. Or we know what's more likely to work and more likely not to work. And so we have an article on the strategy page of Popular Resistance that goes through what it takes to win. And what it takes really is to build a mass movement. There are, there's nonviolent and violent resistance movements. Nonviolent movements actually succeed twice as often as the violent ones, which is interesting, surprised a lot of people. The second thing was, obviously, there are nonviolent movements that fail and some succeed. What makes them different? The more common thing about ones that succeed are they are no longer fringe movements. They become mainstream movements. And the issues we're talking about on this show today are issues that would unite Canadians and Americans across the political spectrum and would be very mainstream. And people do not want corporate courts. They don't want local governments losing their power to take care of their local communities. They don't want anti-democratic legislation snuck through the parliament. I mean, so this is a real opportunity, I think, to build a mass movement because we're going to be on the side of supermajorities of Canadians and Americans, and so we should recognize that. And here's the thing that really is interesting. The research over the last 100 years of resistance movements shows that if you can mobilize 3.5% of the population in support of these issues that are supported by the majority, but 3.5% getting active, no resistance movement has ever lost with 3.5% getting active. That's all. So that's not an unachievable goal. I think in the United States we're approaching 1% being active. I think at the Occupy era, when we were having the encampments, about 1/10 of 1% were active. And we saw that scared the powers that be. I think we're even larger than that now, even though the media is not reporting. I think we're actually growing. So that's the goal, is to get a small percentage active on an issue that's supported by majority. We have majority issues because they're so extreme now on the corporate side and neoliberal side that it's turning off the majorities of people. So we have majority issues. We just need to get people active. And the final thing I'll say is that you need to approach it on a two-track path. One is resistance, blocking the TPP, blocking other trade agreements and other policies that are setting us back. But equally important, if not more important, is creating the world we want. We call it Stop the Machine, Create a New World. And so creating a new world means putting in place the kinds of institutions we want to see. That could be a community council that starts to meet as a community and decide what the community needs and how it can, and get participatory democracy developing at the grassroots level. It could mean setting up worker-owned cooperatives so workers have a say in their workplace and help to share the wealth of the place where they work. It could be land trusts where the community takes control of an area of land through a nonprofit organization and controls the housing prices. Allows for growth, but also prevents these bubbles from developing and prevents developers from coming in and pushing local people out. So there's all sorts of economic democracy and participatory democracy approaches we can start to put in place, and I think we need to do that while we resist what we don't want. And so that's that combination of Stop the Machine, Create a New World, and building a mass movement. And we build a mass movement, by the way, by seeking to pull people from the power structure to our side. That's how it becomes a mainstream movement. You pull people who are in the unions and labor, people from colleges and universities, people from the media, people from business, because small business are being adversely affected by these transnational corporate trade agreements that favor big business over small business. Talking about religious groups, talking about media outlets and nonprofit organizations, and most importantly, police and the military. The police, are particularly impacted by the same issues we are. If healthcare in Canada is destroyed, that will affect every police officer's family. And so they'll be affected as well. And so this is an opportunity for us to build a mass movement and really shape the future. And we should recognize we have much more power than we realize and not be afraid to organize that power.
I think that what you're saying and what Margaret's saying, and maybe the viewers don't always get it, is your influence has sort of a positive energy. It's not using the negative fighting mentality, but it's like the power of positive thinking. When there's a positive energy, lack of a better word, goes to other people, it generates outside of the resistance. It's like we internally and personally and collectively create what we want. So instead of, in a sense, fighting through resistance necessarily, we're fighting through creating the change that we need in our community that affects us globally.
That's exactly right. And it's not positive thinking, it's positive action.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
also courageous action. It's also courageous action. Courage really is contagious. And, for example, in Washington, D.C., we went to the U.S. Trade Representative's office. They're doing a secret trans-Pacific partnership. So we climbed their building and dropped massive banners all around their building exposing this trade agreement. And that energized a lot of people around the country to take action. And so that's one reason why, we were able to stall the TPP so far, is because we took, kind of aggressive action. So don't be afraid to take aggressive action. People will be excited by it. They'll be turned on by it. The courage that you show will be contagious, and the movement will grow and get stronger. So, yeah, positive action, whether it's in resistance or in building what we want, that really does drive the movement and build the movement. And people will be inspired when they see that other people acting. They'll know they have somewhere they can go, because people all care about these issues.
Yes.
And so when they see there's somewhere else to go and get active, you'll be raising that flag high, and people will see it, and they can get involved.
Are there any other websites that you can mention, Margaret and Kevin?
Well, if you go to popularresistance.org, which is our main website, you'll see on the right-hand side links to 5 or so projects that we're working on that deal with the democracy, that deal with arts in resistance. We have a creative resistance website, which is really cool, that shows how art can play a role. And so if you go to popularresistance.org, that's kind of like the center of this spoke of different projects.
All right. Any other?
Yeah. Emphasize one of them is called It's Our Economy, because shifting political power, one way that we do that is by shifting economic power. When we have such wealth inequality, the people at the bottom have no voice and no power. And so It's Our Economy is helping communities to mobilize and create alternative economic structures that help them to build local wealth, local security for food and energy and housing, those kinds of basic necessities, and that allows us to learn how to create these cooperative and democratic structures that, as they develop and grow, we hope will be the basis for the way that we structure our societies moving forward.
And that's itsoureconomy.com?
It's oureconomy.us.
Okay.
It's linked from popularresistance.org. It's from that page.
Okay. Thank you very much, Margaret and Kevin, for coming on today. I just want to warn, even though the Trans-Pacific Partnership is not ratified, what they are doing is they're starting some of the programs that are to be instituted, and one of them being the Internet regulatory system. The Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, called ICANN, has mandated that all ICANN accredited registrars, which are the ISPs, which means the Internet Service Providers, are now being forced to accept the ICANN registry, which is covered by a organization, a so-called society called the NAI, which stands for Network Advertising Initiative. Now, it sounds that these things are just fine because it's advertising, but in true fact, it's a regulatory body that now has been instituted in Canada to all ISP providers. So they have to, they are forced to take and accept ICANN's legislation through government to, per year, register the domains and activate them. They have 5 days basically to verify the email address and the domain, for instance, radiowarrior.ca. they have a situation that they can be suspended at any time, and they, as a regulatory body, can say under your reporting or advertising, they can cut you off. So we have to be aware as Canadians and Americans that the ICANN and NIA are a regulatory body, and ISPs should get together and say, no, we have a who's who. We have a system of being able to register the names and not, accept a regulatory body. Anyway, there is an article on radiowarrior.ca that's gone out worldwide that many people are catching, and I just want to let people know and be aware that the internet is already being stalked by some of the things that is part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was going to ask that what, as the First Nations peoples, what kind of things, Brenda, and also Barbara, can we do actively in participating with your actions with the China FIPA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, actually, one of the things that when your other guests were talking, locally here in our community, there's a lot of different groups. We came together a couple of years ago because of the coal mine that they've been talking about developing in our community. And we had people come out of the woodwork saying, we are going to resist. So we had a worker from the Council of Canadians come and do a workshop. We've had subsequent workshops, and now we have an organization called Peaceful Direct Action Coalition, so that all of the groups that have issues in the Comox Valley are linked, and we are ready to stop that kind of devastation or destruction of our local community and our environment. So those are the kinds of things that we've done already, and we're sort of basically on hold, but people are still actively engaged in this whole issue of the coal development, which we are against, because we already have a wonderful community here and we don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we're prepared to do. And I think there's also a lot of people prepared to go and stand on the line up in the with the pipeline, the Gateway, Northern Gateway pipeline issue. They're ready to build buildings. They're ready to go and live up there or do whatever it takes to stand directly in the line of the destruction or building of that pipeline, if it gets to that.
Exactly. Brenda, what do you see? When I spoke to this politician, he said, we're the last stand. He was basically coming at me from the basis of rights and the rights to the land. What as a First Nations people can we do or link with? Is there an organization or groups that we can connect with to be able to help with the China FIPA agreement to the Trans-Pacific Partnership in your knowledge?
Well, as Hupa just said, we're a small tribe of 300 people, mm-hmm. and we don't have the resources of a larger nation would. So we're always looking for people to help and support us, and I would be the contact person to where people can help us out. The Comox Valley people have been very supportive of our initiative, and I've attended 3 different rallies where I've spoken. And, by being invited to those events, mm-hmm. I get the word out about the Canada-China. And there has also been, we've started a national fundraising campaign across Canada. And, by the time we finish the Court of Appeal, we'll have raised almost $500,000 because we're looking at the Canada-China as a people's court challenge. Yes, it's Hupa just said that's initiating the court challenge, and it's based on our rights and our argument. But in reality, it's going to affect all people of Canada, and that's the attitude that we have taken from the beginning, is that we're all in this together, and we need to move together, and we need people to join us. And like gentleman was saying earlier, city councils making, Port Alberni did, make a resolution at city council that opposed Canada-China FIPA. We don't have a lot of resources, so we actually like people to come and ask us what they can do, to help us along the way. Word has been really slow to get out.
Where would they go? What website or Facebook or connection would they make as Canadians to?
Well, we have a Facebook site. It's called We Stand Together for Canada.com. And it's the story of who put you in the court challenge. People can leave me a private message there. We've also got the same address, We Stand Together for the number 4 Canada @gmail.com. People can contact me through our email address.
For our listeners, can you, in a few minutes, explain, and that I find it very important that people understand what the China FIPA agreement is and how it will affect Canadians, and some of the challenges around if there's an agreement with China. Can they sue us if they're not getting what they want? Can they send their workers to Canada to actually, for instance, work in the mines or do the work as opposed to Canadians? Can you explain a little bit about what the China FIPA agreement actually is?
Well, it will enable all of those things, and it will grant China. And what people have to remember in Canada is that we've already got the NAFTA agreement with the United States, which is the number 1 economic power in the world. And if the government ratifies the Canada-China FIPA, they're the second, largest economy in the world. They've got the power and the means, so we're not dealing with a smaller country that doesn't have the power and the means to come in and buy Canadian natural resource-based companies. The other thing that we have to remember is that already China has, it's about $43 billion worth of investments in Canada now, and it's all kinds of large natural resource-based companies that they've purchased. If Canada-China FIPA is ratified, then it will grant them new powers to be able to move bitumen that they may not be able to transport as easily right now. And I think, when the federal government looked at, and this is just my opinion, at Canada as a whole and what's stopping up natural resource developments, there's a lot of First Nations on the front line saying no. And this is one way to get around that. Because then they can say to Canada, well, the First Nations are holding it up, and then it puts a chill effect on the government, because then they have to make a decision whether they're going to make a decision for the good of the people. And when we look at Alberta and the oil fields there and the First Nations that are suffering from illnesses like cancer, we want our federal government to make the right choices for the people and for the land. And, with this threat of, possibly $1 billion lawsuit hanging over their head, the question is will they? And is that what they're in power to do? Are they in power to make money for the country, or are they there to protect the people? So it's putting economy over people. And these are the kind of things that, people have to be aware of. The investor state arbitration clause gives China a lot of power to sue. I mean, we just have to look at NAFTA cases where Canada has been sued, and we can get a good idea of what's going to be coming after us. And it'll be now 2 states, not 1 state. So these are the things that, we have to consider really carefully as, the people of Canada, and to stand up and say no.
Yes. What, for a last word, Barbara, and And Brenda, what last words could you give to our listeners? I think that Margaret and Kevin logged out. And what last words could you give also concerning your organization, Barbara Council of Canadians, that you have been involved with since the late 90s, I believe? What last words can you give to our viewers to encourage them to become a part of what you're doing and also being part of, finding ways to let Canadians be aware of the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, I would encourage people to become aware of all of these agreements, the TPP and all of the trade agreements, and just in a little bit of reading, become aware of the fact of how they are going to impact us. And we have talked about that on your show, and your listener, if after doing some reading, they'll realize it will impact us ultimately, and that the leader or the people who are making these decisions have to be challenged. That's our political leaders have to be challenged in this area. We have to take a stand and say we're not going to, like your American guest said, we have to say no. We have to be able to be strong enough to say we do not want this. Mm-hmm. Now, we have presently a government that doesn't care about what the masses say. They are interested only in their investors and the people with the power and the will. So we have to basically make it politically unattractive for them to say, we are here and we know what you're doing, and make a lot of noise. And I think the fact that we write letters, I know letters in the paper, I haven't even been doing that as much, but just continue to challenge and be outspoken about it, and continue to try to investigate these issues and talk to neighbors and friends so that they become aware that this world that we so love and have grown up with is becoming unglued. Mm-hmm. And I think that if people want to know anything about these issues, they should go to Canadians.org. Canadians.org is a very good site, and it's constantly being updated. I don't know what else to say except to try and investigate how it will affect them locally, because it will affect them locally. And that's one of the things that we continue to do, is want to try and make our local governments aware and get them on side with working to a positive, to a better way of living and a more positive environment and so forth, which they still, up until this point, they still have control over. But once these agreements are signed, they lose their control. Mm-hmm. So that's a big issue, and I think that we have to get people, local governments, aware that can happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Brenda, any last words?
My hope is really with the youth, because they're going to be their children and their grandchildren that are going to be affected like this. And like the gentleman said earlier, it's everybody's responsibility. When we first looked at the Canada-China FIPA, and I know that in Canada now there's a lot of people feeling hopeless because they're thinking, well, what can we do? They read about these things.
Yep, it's like they feel powerless.
That's right, and there's so many different policy changes that are coming at us from every which way, and especially in particular with First Nations. They're changing all kinds of acts that's going to affect us. So, a lot of the leaders don't know which battle to pick.
Can the First Nations community say corporately or together, sorry, we don't accept this, or with the fishing agreements, sorry, we will use totes as we have for many years. They're trying to change things that will make it harder for fishing, for hunting, and for dealing with our own situations. Can they just say, sorry, no?
Yes, and a lot of communities do assert their Aboriginal rights and titles, and they do things the way that we have traditionally done.
Go ahead.
Right. No, you go ahead.
Has the federal government, for instance, if a First Nations community, which I've been told by politicians that are actually owned by the federal government, has there been challenges where you have, like with the FIPA agreement, that's possibly threatened the funding that goes to First Nations communities?
Well, there's always that risk, and the way that we talked about it at council level is, look, if we challenge this, that may happen. They might cut back our funding, but if we don't challenge it, period, it will affect our funding.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter which way you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends whether, you want to do things proactively or on the other side of things. And, that's what I would encourage people to do, is to, not wait until things are in their own backyard when there's been all these warning bells and people trying to get people aware of what's going on in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Because it will be too late. Canada, the FIPA agreement is 31 years. 31 years. That's a long time. And when I tell people, right, because it's a 15-year agreement, and the government will say differently, but this is how it works. It's 15 years. At the end of 15 years, Canada, the government at the time, can say, we're withdrawing, right? So they give their 1-year notice, but any state-owned company that is in Canada can stay for another 15 years. So it's a 31-year agreement.
And also, if the China FIPA agreement goes through, and Canada realizes how bad it is for them, for instance, and they wake up, they can't say, well, within 5 years we say no, because China will sue Canada for the amount of expected earnings that they would have made in that 15 to 30 years.
Well, that would have to be weighed with, forecasting the length of the agreement. And I believe it was Australia that backed out of a trade agreement. And I'm not sure what the consequences of that are. But there's also political fallout, because in other countries might say, well, do we want to do business with Canada because they're not stable? So all of those things would have to be weighed by say, for example, if the Liberals got in the next election and FIPA was ratified, they'd have to weigh everything and decide whether or not they would,
continue.
If they would, withdraw from the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Weighing everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you, guests, for coming. From the United States, we had Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zies, and from Canada, we had Barbara Berger from Council of Canadians in Comox, and Brenda Sayers. Thank you so much from the Hoopachasset First Nations, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and it was good to be here with all the listeners today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.